sources for each of the water management districts. And then the distribution of the recommended load reduction for each of the water management district proportionally to the potential load reduction. And the next slide, please. Now, here in this slide, you can see.
I'm sorry to step in, but I have a message here that there is no sound in external channels, so we have a technical problem.
It is fixed now, Gun. It's
okay. Thank you very much. So I had a text from a listener.
Yes,
wonderful. Thank you. Sorry to interrupt, Sergey.
Sorry, Sergey.
Можно продолжить, да?
Значит, please continue. So here in this slide, you can see the load of different sources into the nutrient load, or the total nutrient load. As you can see, the main source is the Lake Ladoga, which is only natural because the water catchment area of Lake Ladoga is about 80% of the overall area of the catchment area for the Gulf of Finland. With all of that, Lake Ladoga retains about 70% of phosphorus and about 40% of the incoming nitrogen. And so the efficacy of measures associated with the reduction of the yield from Ladoga to the Gulf of Finland is extremely low. And for that particular reason, first of all, we're looking at the areas which are immediately next to the Gulf area. And the next slide. And here you can see the dynamics of the beginning of this century, prior to the Copenhagen Ministerial Declaration adoption. And in the middle, in the column, you can see what is required by the Baltic Sea Action Plan. Yellow color demonstrates the part which goes beyond that level, that requirement, and Russia needs to reduce the nutrient load on the Gulf of Finland by that amount. Now, here in this slide, you can see the results of the qualitative assessment of the potential of the load reduction as a sum of point and diffuse sources. For the point sources as a norm, we took the HELCOM recommendations on the emission, on the discharge of wastewater, and for diffuse sources, as the result of the application of the best available technologies in agriculture. So this characteristic was calculated with the help of the mathematical modeling. And thus we defined the potential of the load reduction for each of the water management districts. And here in the next slide, you can see the distribution, the final two columns. These are the recommendations for the load reduction for each of the water management district, proportional to their potential. And on the basis of the results obtained, we can see that for nitrogen, there are practically no problems. The reduction should be equal to the amount which is much lower than the potential. And as for phosphorus, the required reduction is somewhat higher than the potential of the load reduction. And so it follows from this that in order to follow the HELCOM recommendations, we need to carry out certain actions in the areas which are located in the higher areas, in the other water management districts. And here is the graphic distribution of the required load reduction. Between the water management districts. And we can see here that the major reduction of the load for phosphorus and nitrogen is associated with two water management districts, namely the water management district where St. Petersburg is located, and the water management district, that's the catchment area of the Neva River. And finally, I can say that these results have been submitted to the Ministry for Natural Resources for further practical work. Thank you for your attention. That's all I plan to say. Thank you.
Sorry, we seem to have technical problems this morning. Sorry to all your listeners. I just understood that we had some technical problems initially. I hope they're all solved. Thank you a lot, Sergey, for this interesting overview of the situation. Just a few clarifying questions. You mentioned the potential and put that in relation to what was needed. And looking at the potential, where would you say, in which sectors is the largest potential for further reductions?
No, we
looked at two types of sources, point and diffuse. The point sources. Now, the main potential here is associated with the emissions, so with the discharges, and HELCOM sets its goals. So the potential was calculated as the improvement, the potential improvement from the point of view of the reduction and improvement of the discharges following the recommendations. If the HELCOM recommendations are complied with, then it's all right. In agriculture, we are talking about the implementation of the best available technologies, European, Russian, and so if these technologies are being implemented, then we will reach the level that is needed and that we're aiming at. And the potential of reduction is the difference between what we have and what we need to have.
Yes, thank you. Would you say, as you mentioned, the Baltic Sea Action Plan, would you say that this work within the plan has also contributed to the Russian already existing good work on eutrophication?
Ну вот у нас есть.
No, we have a slide here, which demonstrates what we had in the 1990s and what we achieved by 2013. And the difference there is quite significant. For phosphorus, for example, you can see that the phosphorus load goes down, and with nitrogen, it's not that good, but the result is there.
Okay, thank you. In here. It's about the biogenic load on the Gulf of Finland. And the question is it possible to say what kind of measures should be taken to reduce the biogenic load?
Вот те меры, о которых я...
The measures that I have mentioned, the HELCOM norms should be introduced at all the wastewater treatment plants and at all the companies. And the introduction of the best available technologies in agriculture. These are two basic directions we should aim at in order to reduce the nutrient load in the catchment area.
Thank More questions later and also from the audience. And now we will move on to Linda Kumblad, Associate Professor in Systems Ecology here at Baltic Sea Center at Stockholm University. Please, Linda, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much.
Спасибо большое.
So,
Таким образом,
my screen now?
да, я надеюсь, вы слайды мои видите, да? Да.
Perfect. Well, I will present a local example of a demonstration project. And that project was initiated and funded by a private foundation, Baltic Sea 2020. And it started already 2011. But since 2020, it is now hosted by Stockholm University, the Baltic Sea Center, where we try to evaluate the results more in detail. And we have also received funding from the Swedish Agency for Marine and Water Management for measures and measurements. So I will start with showing you this satellite image of Stockholm archipelago area. And the reason for that is to show the example of the type of environment that this project address and the measures that we have used. And this is areas with a lot of islands and bays and sills and straits. And that, of course, limits the water exchange. And in these areas also the local pollution can have a local effect. So this is the type of environment we are addressing. And circle here is Björnefjärden, which actually is the bay we have been working with. It's located outside Stockholm. Living Coast, which the name of the project is, that's a full-scale remediation project. And the aim of the project is to investigate if it's possible to achieve a good ecological status in coastal areas that are severely eutrophied and have a large extension of anoxic bottoms. And also, as I said, limited water exchange that worsen the situation. And we selected to work with Björnefjärden in Stockholm archipelago, which was one of the worst cases actually that we could find in Stockholm archipelago. And in this bay, we have performed measures, both in the catchment and in the bay, to reduce the nutrient input to the water and reduce the eutrophication. We have also performed a frequent monitoring, both in Björnefjärden, but also in a reference bay nearby, to be able to distinguish effects from our measures from the natural variability in these ecosystems. And during the project, we have also tried to put effort into communication to stimulate action in other areas. The map to the right shows that, well, the map here to the right shows the ecological status in the Svealand coastal waters outside Stockholm. And red stands for poor ecological status, and good and green, that is blue and green. Good and high is good, blue and green. And as you can see, most of the area is yellow, orange, and red, meaning that it's poor status. And there are only a few examples. And one of the examples is Björnefjärden that is encircled here. And actually it turned green due to the actions we have made. So we're really happy about that. Along the whole project, we have been using an ecosystem approach. And a very first and important step was to identify the nutrient sources in the catchment area to be able to prioritize the action that is needed. And that included to map the different land uses and activities in the catchment. And we performed a lot of measurements in the ditches, etc., and in the bay, of course, to be able to calculate the nutrient transport. And we have also tried to identify the anthropogenic versus the natural nutrient loads to calculate the action potential and select the most cost-efficient measures. And this illustration shows Björnefjärden and its catchment area. And as you can see, it's a very narrow strait to the water body outside. So it's really a limited water exchange here. And that actually makes the eutrophication a lot worse than outside or more open areas. But it also makes it possible to detect an effect of local measures. And that's one of the reasons to selecting such an enclosed system. All the illustrations around the map illustrate the different sources, nutrient sources, as well as the measures that we have performed. And the numbers next to the illustrations shows estimates of the annual phosphorus load from these sources prior the measures that we have conducted. And if we are summing up the phosphorus load from the land, you can see that it is approximately 200 kilograms of phosphorus per year, which enters the water from land. And down in the picture, you can see the number 600 next to the sediment. And that number illustrates the phosphorus that is circulated within the bay between the water and the sediment. And this phosphorus originates from the land sources from the beginning and has entered the bay during the last decades or even the century. But because of the large extension of the anoxic bottoms, the capacity for the sediment is poor to bind phosphorus. So instead it is leaking back to the water column again and enhancing the eutrophication. So when looking at the numbers, it might be the case that you feel that it's most important to make an effort to stopping the internal phosphorus load and only address the sediment, but it's as important to also address the land sources, as the land sources is an annual addition from land to the water, and that will, of course, contribute to this internal phosphorus load in the sediment. So what did we do then? Well, we performed agriculture measures, including structural liming, phosphorus ponds, etc. And we have performed measures to reduce the nutrient load from the horse activities in the catchment. We have also performed measures or helped the private house owner to improve their sewers in the private houses and also the sewage system in the conference center in the area. And to stop this internal cycling of phosphorus, the internal phosphorus load, we have performed an aluminum treatment. And that is a well-known lake restoration method that we have used for the very first time in a marine or a brackish water environment. And during that treatment, an aluminum solution was added into the sediment that bind the phosphorus in a permanent way and prevents further circulation. And we have also performed some measures to stimulate the predatory fish, so we can have a more healthy fish stock of that, because that helps to reduce the eutrophication. To be able to follow the response in the ecosystem to these measures, we have also performed a lot of measurements and followed the water and the biota closely since 2011. And this graph shows the average total phosphorus concentration in Björnefjärden and in the reference bay over the project period. And the gray bars indicate the periods of aluminum treatment. And as you can see, the concentration decreases by approximately 50% during the aluminum treatment period compared to prior the treatment and also compared to the reference bay. And you can see that the concentration remains that low for a couple of years, but now there seems to be a slow increase of phosphorus in the water again. Nevertheless, this phosphorus reduction in the water has resulted in less phytoplankton in the water column, which in turn has improved the Secchi depth. So the water is now more clear, and that has resulted in that we can find benthic algae deeper in the bay. And we also see a somewhat improved water, oxygen situation at intermediate levels of the water. And we can also see that benthos and fish are found in deeper water layers now than in the beginning of the project. And we can see indication of changing fish composition, but that is more looked into at the moment. Yes, to sum up, I think we can from this project conclude that it actually is possible to improve the water quality and environment in enclosed coastal bays. And we can even get a good ecological status, as we did in this case in terms of phosphorus. And we have learned also that to get a quick positive response as we did, it is needed to reduce the nutrient supply from the sediment, or this circulation between sediment and water. But also to be able to maintain this improvement, it is also fundamental to reduce the external load from the land sources. And it's really important to put effort into identifying and quantifying the different sources in the catchment area to be able to prioritize the most cost-efficient actions. And we have learned that working with eutrophication, it takes a lot of time and patience, and it also somewhat costly, of course. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Linda. Very interesting. I know, of course, from our previous discussions that you have had a lot of involvement from the local residents, the different, as you said, local people living there, the conference center, etc. How was it? Was it difficult to get the engagement of the local actors?
Well, at first, it was not difficult because, of course, everyone wanted an improvement of their local environment. So they were very supportive. After a while, some become quite reluctant because quite a few had to improve their private sewers, and that's costly. But eventually, also, a lot of those people became positive again because they could actually see the improvements in the bay by eye. The water quality was better, the visibility was better, and they could also see that we were addressing all the different sources in the catchment area. And I think that was quite an important signal to show that everyone has to contribute to improve the situation.
Yeah, so you were not sort of pinpointing one specific action, but you were involving everybody. Did that include the community also?
Community, what do you mean?
I mean, kommunen, you know, the community,
the municipality.
The municipality.
Yes, especially regarding working with the private sewers, and that's of course an issue that they need to be involved in because they have to sort of put permits into to this also.
Mm-hmm. And then, as you stressed, you stressed lots of important issues. For instance, the fact that this is an enclosed bay. But if you also mention the time perspective. So now I know that you are looking into more in detail what is happening. You're following the area. would you say that your guess would be that you would have to repeat the aluminum treatment? Or is it too early to say?
Well, I guess that's a bit too early to say. We unfortunately we believe that the phosphorus concentration will increase a bit again, and that is mainly because the actions on land haven't really had the full effect yet. So in the ideal case, I guess one would focus on the land issue first and then do this aluminum treatment in the end of the project, but that was not possible within the time frame of the project. And another thing that influenced the bay now is the nutrients coming from outside, of course, because there is a water exchange, although it's quite limited. But we are looking into these issues also by using modeling efforts. So hopefully we will be wiser.
Mm-hmm. So then please, Dr. Kondrachev, please join us with the discussion. And I will ask a question addressing it really to both of you from your different positions, and also since you work in totally different geographical areas. But maybe to start with you, Linda, to follow up. We have a question in the chat asking, how long would it take really to completely prevent eutrophication, or is that not at all possible?
Oh, I would say it depends on the scale. Talking about the whole Baltic Sea, I think we really need a lot of patience, because then we are talking about decades to improve the situation. At the local scale, I think it could be quicker, a lot quicker.
And Dr. Kondrachev, what would you say? Is this possible if you look at the Gulf of Finland, for instance?
No, I would like to say that eutrophication is a process, is a one direction process, so to speak. Whatever you do, you will never be able to go back to the initial state. We can improve certain indicators. We can reduce the phosphorus concentration, for example, but the ecosystem is going to be different no matter what. So the Great American Lakes took 50 years to be remediated. And we are dealing with the sea, with the Baltic Sea. So it really might take decades and maybe even hundreds of years, but there is no alternative. We need to reduce the load. As for the separate areas, like bays, then the improvement there is quite possible. And there is a good number of examples like that. If we take the lake near Pskov, the Chudskoye Lake, that's a good example. There is a lot of internal load. Yes, the exchange with the sediments. And so what should we do with the main source? Is it possible to influence the major source? Because if there are 40, 50 kilograms from the catchment area, but from the sediments 600, then what goes into the sediments can come out, so to speak. So what do we do about that? And it seems to me that here, the methods of mathematical modeling and forecasting are very important. My colleague said that they used the modeling methods. That's very interesting for us to learn more about. I know that Sweden has a very good school of mathematical modeling, and Nest Institute works on that. They have the Baltic Sea model there, and it works there. So I think that for these particular purposes, the modeling is very important for us to be able to forecast for many years coming. And here we should also remember about the climate changes and the impact of climate change. And so the methods of mathematical modeling are going to be most useful. Thank you.
Thank you very And I'm happy to say that the Nest Institute is part of the Baltic Sea Center. So there are lots of skillful colleagues to collaborate with, of course. One more question, Dr. Kondrachev. If you look at the sort of inflow to the Gulf of Finland from nutrient-rich water, of course, coming from the open sea, if you look at that amount and the influence of that influx in relation to the loading from land, what would you say make the most harmful to the water? What is the most important part?
Я думаю, что это вопрос скорее.
I think this is the question to the Nest model, which calculates the exchange between different parts, because they work on that. We mostly looked at the load on the Gulf and in the Gulf, and the load in the Neva Bay, which is actually freshwater. And as for the mass exchange with the Baltic proper, we have not studied that. So there is another group of professionals who are working on the modeling of the ecosystem for the Baltic Sea in general. If you take HELCOM, for example, HELCOM defined the requirements for each of the countries on the basis of the knowledge about the processes in the Baltic Sea, knowing the mass exchange between the different parts of the Baltic Sea area. This is the foundation for the recommendations worked out by them for each area, for each country. Mass exchange between the Gulf of Finland and Central Baltic, that's not my competence in this case.
Thank you. Both of you stressed the time perspective, the fact that addressing eutrophication takes a lot of time. And, you know, it came to my head, the fact that if you work with policy, you need to convince policymakers to keep on doing actions, even if they don't see the results. What are your opinions around this? How do we actually increase the understanding of the time perspective? Linda?
Yeah, it's a really, really important question that you put there. And I think maybe this kind of projects that I presented, they have a really important role to play there to show that measures can have effect. You can see them quite quickly at the local scale, but it really takes a lot of time to see them at the larger scale. So I think it's important to bring up the good examples, and it's also very important to make measurements in streams and so to show that actions on land actually have an effect on the water quality. But since the internal load of the larger Baltic Sea is so large, it will take a lot of time to see the full scale effect of it. But then again, our colleagues at the Baltic Nest, their modeling efforts show a slow improvement, and those are also important signals to show that our efforts have an effect, but we have to have the patience to wait for the effect to be possible to see at the larger scale.
Yeah, if I understand it correctly, you have to correct me, you're the experts, less nitrogen and phosphorus are actually now being loaded to the sea in relation to what's either being strictly bounded to the sediments or sort of flushing out. So we're actually emptying the sea slowly.
Yes, and that's really important to communicate. I think that we are actually on the right track, but we need to keep on doing the thing that we are doing and have the patience.
Yes. And what's your opinion, Dr. Kondrachev?
Ну, я хочу сказать,
Well,
что
I would like to say that there is no alternative. Fortunately, That is the only way um, for us to normalize the situation with eutrophication. But we shouldn't forget that there are other factors, the pollution factors, which are not related to phytoplankton. As there is an enormous amount of different substances that are just pollutants, not through the biota as and in eutrophication, but directly. And yes, at present, for the Baltic, it has been decided that eutrophication is one of the most serious challenges, but there is a lot of other problems we should not forget about.
Hmm.
And as for the politicians, now, how can we attract them? How can we involve those who are responsible for that? I think life itself pushes them towards that. Life has been demonstrating that without professionals, without research work, nothing can be achieved. Life itself makes it necessary for us to take concrete measures.
Thank you. So just a final question. Time is flying here. So you are now in the position of being policymakers, and you can decide what has to happen tomorrow. So Linda, what would you do?
Yeah, so of course I would allocate a lot of money for local measures, because the measures need to be done at the local scale, even to improve the situation in the larger scale. And measures costs, so we have to allocate money for that.
All right, so good funding for local measures. And Sergey, what would you prefer?
Завтра я не политик.
Tomorrow, no, I'm not a politician, but tomorrow I will complete a joint Finnish-Russian project on the reduction of biogenic load in the trans-border water bodies in the Gulf of Finland. That's what I'm going to do tomorrow. Thank you.
Thank you ever so much. And thank you, Sergey and Linda, who have contributed to this very nice seminar and this discussion. I'm sure the discussion on eutrophication will go on. And thank you for all listening. We at the Stockholm University Baltic Sea Center will be back with another webinar on Baltic Sea issues already 26th of October. And this will be about chemical issues, about the concept of essential use. But you can follow us via our English newsletter, and there will be all information. Thank you very much, and good day, and have a nice day.
Thank you all. Good, wonderful.
Большое спасибо, что пригласили.
Thank you very much for the invitation.